Your chant leader today. I have one rule for chants, all right? Bring the energy. I want to serve everybody in that building. I want to serve everybody in all these buildings, y'all. This is an amazing day for our watch event, all right? So I'll need y'all to repeat after me when we call back to chant. We're going to run through it twice, okay?
Yeah.
All right? Let's do it. Full transparency.
Full transparency
Is what we need.
is what we need.
How many stops at?
How many stops at?
It must succeed.
It must succeed.
One more time. Full transparency
Full transparency
is what we need.
is what we need.
How many stops at?
How many stops at?
It must succeed.
It must
Let's
succeed.
go. There we go, people. So that's the first chant we're going to do today, all right? We're going to go over one more, and that way y'all will know it, all right? All right, let's do it. Repeat after me one more time. How many stops?
How many stops?
We need to know.
We need to know.
How many stops at?
How many stops at?
Pass it now.
Pass it now.
One more time. How many stops?
How many stops?
We need to know.
We need to know.
How many stops at?
How many stops at?
Pass it now.
Pass it now.
Awesome. There we go, y'all. Thank you. We're about to have some amazing speakers over the course of the day. But to kick us off, we have our wonderful two moderators, led off by Gabby Cuesta from JC. Let's go, Justin.
Thank you so much, Obi, for those chants. Can y'all hear me? Yeah. All right. I'm Gabby Cuesta. I'm a member of the Justice Committee. And to give a little background on JC, JC is a grassroots organization that works with families who've lost loved ones to police violence and survivors of police violence. They're also a steering committee member of Communities United for Police Reform. I just want to thank everyone who's here behind me, all of you for being here today to call on the City Council to pass the How Many Stops Act. This is really important, so we're really thankful for all of you.
All right, give it up for Gabby. Okay. All right, I'm Salah Serum. I'm from the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. Can y'all hear me? All right, now we're here to launch, okay? So make sure we keep this energy high. All right, so the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement is an organization whose mission is to defend the human rights of folks from the Black communities, right? And so we promote self-determination and we defend our human rights. And we are also a steering committee member of CPR. And so, before we bring up our speakers, I want to take a second to pause and reflect on the current moment and what that means here for us in New York. And as we grapple with the horrifying police killings of Tyree Nichols in Tennessee and Anthony Lowe Jr. in California, we have to remember that while these incidents occurred in different cities, they stem from the same systemic problems with policing and the same failed approach to public safety that led to the NYPD killings of Antonio Williams, Alan Felice, Kowalski Trowick, Daron Small, Ronald Anthony Smith, Eric Garner, and too many others here in New York City. So, Communities United for Police Reform is a coalition of organizations led by and accountable to the New York City communities that, for decades, have borne the brunt of the NYPD's racist and abusive policing. We're here today to demand that our elected officials take concrete action to end police violence and ensure true community safety. Immediately passing the How Many Stops Act to require reporting on all NYPD street stops, investigative encounters, and consent searches is an essential part of this. All right? So take a second, take a moment, think about what we need to do. Those names I read, bring them into your hearts, bring them into your spirits, bring them into this moment. All right? Along with passing the How Many Stops Act immediately, the mayor and the NYPD commissioner must immediately fire officers who have unjustly killed New Yorkers. The strategic response group, all right. have unjustly killed New Yorkers?
Yes.
Okay. The Strategic Response Group and the mayor's rebrand of the anti-crime unit must be disbanded.
Yeah.
Okay? We must transform our city's approach to public safety through the way resources are allocated. Come on, this stuff is simple, right? Passing the How Many Stops Act to gain full transparency about how NYPD officers are operating in our communities is a bottom line must, right? It's simple. This is a racial justice issue. It's a public safety issue. It is common sense. Let's go. It's part of the multi-tier approach we need to ensure safety, health, and justice for all New Yorkers. It's simple. It's part of the bottom line. Let's go. Now, I'm going to pass it to my co-MC, Gabby, to explain the two bills and introduce our first speakers.
Thank you so much, Salah, for that energy. So I'm going to explain these bills. They are very simple, right? The How Many Stopped Act consists of two bills, and these bills are going to bring critical and urgent transparency to the NYPD's daily activities in our communities, right? So the first is Intro 586. That's going to require the NYPD to report the location of all level 1 and 2 police stops, as well as demographic information on the person stopped, the reason for the encounter, and whether the encounter leads to any use of force or enforcement action. So right now, the NYPD is only required to report on level 3 stops, right? What we know as stop and frisk. That leaves the vast majority of encounters unreported, right? That's not accountability. The second bill is Intro 538, and that's going to require the NYPD to report fully about their use of consent searches. These are stops in which an NYPD officer asks permission to conduct a search of a person or their belongings. This data would include the total number of requests for consent to search, including when those requests are refused, and when the NYPD uses consent searches to collect DNA information from New Yorkers. It would also include officers' use of interpretation services when seeking consent from people with limited English proficiency, which is required by the Right to Know Act law already. The vast majority of the time, it's just a few horrific stories of police killings that make it into the news, excuse me. Right, and we see this. What this fails to show is that police killings are just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much underneath that. Thousands of examples of daily violence experienced by members of Black, Latinx, and other communities of color in New York City, right? Because of constant, disparate, low-level enforcement and broken windows policing that does not keep us safe. Research proves that this kind of policing inflicts harm and real emotional distress, overwhelmingly on Black and Latinx New Yorkers, as well as other communities of color. LGBTQ, GNC people, non-citizens, those who are unhoused, religious minorities, low-income people, and youth. This has to stop. These experiences are frightening and traumatizing and violent. In the worst cases, they escalate to illegal stops and arrests, brutality, and even death. And we've seen that time and time again. I am honored to introduce our first speakers, Sean and Gladys Williams. They are the parents of Antonio Williams, who was killed by the NYPD's version of the Scorpion Unit in 2019. Antonio Williams' story is an example of how bad the kind of policing covered by the How Many Stops Act can get. So please, everyone, give them so much love as I welcome them up here.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Sean Williams, the father of Antonio Williams, who was killed by NYPD in 2019, September 28th. While waiting for a cab, they approached him, chased him down, beat him, and then shot and killed him. He was a brother, a son, and a father. And, the mayor's version of the anti-crime team is the same thing as a Scorpion unit that killed Tyrese Nichols in Memphis. Then he turns around, he wants to pat himself on the back to rename it to the neighborhood safety team. To me, it's the same thing. Same thing, just change the name of it. That's why we hope and we need this bill passed. We need the How Many Stops Act passed with urgency so we can try to eliminate these incidents from happening. And we force the mayor and everyone around him for transparency in these situations.
Hi, my name is Gladys Williams, Antonio Williams' stepmom. Let me explain NYPD's level 1, 2, and 3 stops. If the NYPD has no suspicion of you doing any criminal act, you're free to leave on level 1 and 2s. But in reality, as New Yorkers, if we feel detained, if we're frightened, we're scared, so we really don't know the difference. So in most cases, these encounters escalate to beatings and even killings. If we have more transparency on NYPD's level 1 and 2 stops, the abuse against Black and Latinx New Yorkers will be reported, and they would most likely stop doing what they're doing out in these streets. And all I'm asking for is the City Council to pass this How Many Stops Act to stop this abuse on the New Yorkers. If this act wasn't, back in 2019, Antonio would be here with us right now. Let's stop these senseless acts and these senseless deaths. And also, we call on Mayor Adams and Commissioner Sewell to fire the NYPD cops that were involved in killing Antonio. And we got to make this difference. We got to make these How Many Stop Acts present. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. Let's give a whole lot more love to Mr. and Mrs. Williams. Please, right now.
Yeah.
That we're here for that, and thank you for your bravery. Thank you for your courage. Our next speaker is Sammy Feliz, the brother of Alan Feliz, who, like Tyree Nichols, was killed by the NYPD after a car stop. Sammy?
First and foremost, I want to thank every one of you guys for being out here. I know that this isn't the trendy thing to come and get news on, so I appreciate every one of you guys' time for being out here. I want to start off by saying my name is Sammy Feliz. I am the brother of Alan Feliz, who was tragically murdered by NYPD in the Bronx, October 17th of 2019. My brother was stopped in his vehicle. He was beaten, tasered, and fatally shot one time in the chest. After he was shot, the officers, which there were 3 involved, it was Sergeant Jonathan Rivera, Officers Edward Barrett, and Officer Michelle Amanzar. After my brother was shot by Sergeant Jonathan Rivera, Officer Barrett yanked his body out of the car, exposing his genitals and leaving him at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for the world to see. Kids walking home from school and things like that. Instead of providing him any type of medical assistance or even covering him up, having that decency, they denied that. They left him out to bleed, And while my brother laid on the floor for the next 18 minutes, losing his life, he wasn't provided any first aid. And this all happened half a block away from Mount Fiore Hospital. My brother could have been saved, even though they made a mistake. Sadly, this is the kind of disrespect and violence, or this kind of disrespect and violence is the rule, not the exception under Eric Adams. And we have only seen things get worse. Alongside with losing my brother, I've been personally profiled, harassed, unjustly stopped by the NYPD, like too many Latinx and New Yorkers here today with us. I can share stories for days of how I get profiled and pulled over, but we don't have that much time. These days, in my personal neighborhood, Washington Heights area, the neighborhood safety team is running rampant, conducting all type of stops and searches and not providing any type of security to us as individuals within the community. Me personally, within the last 2 months, I've been stopped by this neighborhood safety team, in which 2 vehicles approached me and a group of people who were hanging out outside, and they decided that it was okay for them to figure out what we had on us and what we were doing and why we were there when we were just enjoying part of our community. I can be waiting for a table outside of a restaurant and I have a neighborhood safety team asking me what's going on and what I'm doing. They asked me if I had anything on me. I allowed them to conduct their search. Why? Because the entire time I'm having this experience with this officer, he has his hands on his holster and on his gun like John Wayne, and that's not anything that makes me as a New Yorker feel safe or reassured. That's an intimidation tactic. That's a coercion for me to allow him to check me. And these are the things that we need to change with this bill and this systematic violence that we're still experiencing day to day. Now, the Right to Know Act law that New Yorkers fought for and won in 2017 requires officers to gain voluntary and knowing knowledge as a consent to search someone without probable cause. That wasn't consent, like I explained. It was intimidation. The NYPD's culture of violence and disrespect for Black and Latinx New Yorkers is not a problem with a few bad apples. It's a systematic lack of transparency and accountability. With Mayor Adams flooding with more and more officers into a community, full transparency is more urgent now more than ever. And that's why one of the actions New York City elected officials must take into consideration is passing the How Many Stops Act. My family and I are also calling for Mayor Adams and Commissioner Sewell to fire these officers that murdered my brother tragically on that day. And that's Officer Sergeant Jonathan Rivera, Officers Edward Barrett, and Michelle Amanzar. I thank you guys so much for your time.
Let's give some more love to Sammy. Always showing up for Alan, always showing up to make New Yorkers safer. We appreciate you. All right, so I also want to acknowledge and give a shout out to Victor Dempsey, the brother of Delron Small, who was killed by NYPD officer Wayne Isaacs in 2016. So can we show some love to Victor? I'm gonna hand it over to Obi for some more chants. So let's bring up this energy.
Yeah. Mic check, can y'all hear me? Yeah. I said mic check, can y'all hear me? Yeah. One more time, I want to give it up to all of our family members who came out today. Thank y'all for sharing your stories, sharing your experiences with us. Justice for Antonio Williams. Let me hear y'all say it.
Justice for Antonio Williams.
Justice for Alan Felice.
Justice for Alan Felice.
For Black and brown people, there is no such thing as a routine stop. Every encounter with law enforcement puts us at risk. So we need to be out here and we need to ask our city officials how many more. All right, y'all, let's run it back with some chants. Repeat after me. Full transparency.
Full transparency
Is what we need.
is what we need.
How many stops at?
How many stops at?
It must succeed.
It must succeed.
Louder. Full transparency.
Full transparency
Is what we need.
is what we need.
How many stops at?
How many stops at?
It must succeed.
It must succeed.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all. All right. Our next speakers are going to be. Oh, never mind. I'm going to kick it off back to our awesome moderator.
All right. So next, we're gonna bring bring out our two lead sponsors of the How Many Stops Act. Council members Alexa Avilies and Crystal Hudson. We want to thank you both for your commitment and courage to push for real NYPD transparency and your accountability to those who are most impacted by NYPD's abusive practices. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, hello, good people. Good morning. So, good evening, good afternoon. So, we have mourned the lives of far too many Black people and Latinx people in this country. We've seen time and time again how routine police stops have ended tragically. When is enough ever going to be enough? The bills that we are talking about today are common sense, and not the Republican common sense that makes no sense. For years, we've been trying to get the NYPD to report the data on a vast majority of interactions between New Yorkers and the police. For years, the NYPD has resisted. Why, I ask? Why do we wonder they're resisting very basic data? The city council passes tons of bills annually on having agencies report data on their operations. We do this why? Because we want to know with taxpayer dollars, are they doing the job that we are trusting them to do in the public? Are they working effectively? Are they working efficiently? And so this is not an unusual, strange request coming out from the universe. This is a very basic demand, a very basic request. This is a request to make sure that the agency is accountable and reporting on what it is doing. Any lack of data, do you know why people don't collect data? Why, we ask? Why? They want to hide what they are doing.
That's right.
When there is no data, you cannot prove. You can use stories and hyperbole. You can use the outliers to say that that is the reality. So we say absolutely not. We demand the data. We want to see what is happening. So on this basic premise, and some people will say, well, damn, this is a lot of work to report data. Well, in order to do better by our communities, in order to make sure we are spending our money appropriately, we need to do better and demand better. And data is one of those things, and that's what these bills do. So I'm just really proud to be able to support and co-sponsor this with Public Advocate Jumaane Williams. 586 requires, as you've all heard, the police to report all their street stops, including, unquote, routine stops. We need to understand what they are doing here. Our communities deserve it, and quite frankly, as you have seen in New York City and across the country, our lives depend on this. With nearly a majority of city council members signing onto both bills, we still need a little more push, because that's only the beginning. We sign on, we got to get them passed, then we have to make sure that it actually happens when it gets passed. So if NYPD can't report on what it is they do, how objectively can we evaluate the product of their work? And just like was said earlier, we have a tendency to want to repackage shit that don't work, repackage broken policies, and repackage broken approaches that harm us over and over again. Well, I'm done with the repackaging. No more repackaging, no more calling it nonsense. We want the data, we want transparency, and we want accountability. And that is the only way that we can begin to move towards some level of community safety. So this is a bare bones, y'all. This is not fully encompassing where we need to go, but it is a start. And so anyone who talks about community safety and wants to start using that rhetoric, then they should be down here, because this, again, is the bare bones of reporting.
Right.
That's right.
That's right. So lastly, I just want to say, we are here for the safety of our communities. Every New Yorker deserves to be safe. Every New Yorker deserves the privilege of walking outside on any street and not feeling like they are going to encounter death because somebody is profiling them. We are tired of this situation, and we demand a very different system. And we demand, outside of these bills, I ask for your support and your push. We demand that the NYPD fire those officers. If you believe in justice and you say you want to build trust and you want to empower the community and all this other nonsense that you're constantly using, take a step. Report on your work. Show us that you actually are doing something decent. Fire those officers who have killed New Yorkers over the decades. And stop repackaging these nonsense policies and practices and programs and tactics that, quite frankly, continue to harm us. I don't care what you call it. The end result is the same. We are less safe. We are harmed in the process. So those are the three things we ask. I have taken way too much time, so I want to pass it over to my incredible colleague, Councilmember Hudson. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I want to first thank the families for being out here, for sharing your stories, and commend Communities United for Police Reform, Justice Committee, and everybody that's here. You all have kept up the energy, and it's hard, I have to say, when we hear the stories and the accounts of families who've lost loved ones at the hands of the NYPD. It's hard to stay, high energy, and so but it's what's necessary in order to garner the support that we need, the attention that we need to be put on the How Many Stops Act, which is common sense legislation, as Councilmember Avilies